everyone, my name is Fraeya and welcome to my Broom closet. Today I'm going to be talking about things I wish I knew when I first started witchcraft. This isn't gonna be like a beginner tips video because I don't really want to make one just because there are a bajillion beginner witch tip videos out there, so I'd rather not saturate it further. If you are interested in a beginner tips video, then let me know. And of course I already have a beginner tips video for Broom closet witches. So those are witches who have to practice in secret. Just be warned, it is a bit of a lower quality video just because it was my very first video, but the advice is sound nonetheless. So this video is for both open witches and closet witches, and it's just going to be things that I wish I knew when I first started, or I wish someone had told me about these things. And it's going to be mostly through the eyes of a closet witch, but this will be useful to open witches as well. Point number one is you do not have to be Wiccan to practice witchcraft. So this confusion arose for me and probably arises in other witches because most books in like mainstream bookstores, like most mainstream books are written by Wiccans. So all of these books are written about witchcraft but like through the eyes of a Wiccan, so you get very Wiccan influenced knowledge. This led to slight confusion for me because it gave me the impression that Wicca was basically the only way. That is not true. It's just all of the books that I first read were about Wicca as opposed to witchcraft, which I didn't quite understand at the time. That's not a bad thing on its own, like Wicca is quite a good place to start when you want to learn about witchcraft, but it caused problems for me personally because of the inner turmoil that it really caused for me, because I was a Christian. I grew up in a Christian household. So I really didn't want to leave my religion behind. I thought I'd go to hell or something. So I didn't want to, stop worshipping my Christian god and then start worshipping this god and goddess that is associated with Wicca. I thought that was a bit weird and too much of a big step to take. Witchcraft itself is not a religion. It's a skill, it's a practice that you develop over time, and it can actually be practiced theoretically in conjunction with any religion. I say theoretically because I don't know that for sure. I don't know anything about Islamic witchcraft for instance, but I will have a video in the future about Christian witchcraft. Spell work and other practices like earth worship, having an altar, burning incense, those aren't exclusive to Wicca. Wicca itself is actually not a structured system for magic. Instead, you would refer to witchcraft, hoodoo, or ceremonial magic. Those are systems of magic, not Wicca. Point number two is you don't have to be religious to practice witchcraft. This is similar to the last point, and I kind of covered it, but it's separate in its own way. I see so many beginner witches confused about this concept. I think it's mostly because you see so many witches working with deities and spirits. They think you have to be a theist or you have to believe in gods or God in some way. That's not true. Secular witchcraft is a thing, and like I said, witchcraft is not a religion. So not only can witchcraft be practiced theoretically within any religion, it can also be practiced with no religion at all. I myself am actually a secular witch. I know almost next to nothing about deity work, to be perfectly honest. I am still learning about that. I've just never had the desire to work with gods and goddesses, so I'm secular. That is the word that you look up for atheistic or agnostic witchcraft, where you don't want to work with any gods or goddesses or anything like that. As a secular witch, I prefer not to work with deities. I actually prefer to work with energies in general, or actually psychological archetypes. Point number three is that witchcraft is not anti-science. Witchcraft and science are not mutually exclusive, and they're actually quite tightly interwoven in some respects. I wish so much that I knew this when I first started, because I've gone on to study a STEM subject now, at degree level, and let me tell you, I felt like such an imposter when I was pursuing that career path. It wasn't until years had passed until I found a online community that practices witchcraft from a skeptical and scientific viewpoint, which really resonates with me. You can find this community on Reddit. It's called r/saswitches. That stands for Skeptic, Agnostic, Science-Seeking Witches. The really troubling thing about this point, unfortunately, is that earlier this year, The Independent published this article about this woman who tried witchcraft for a week. I'm sure you can see some of the issues there. Basically, the article right at the end concluded that this anti-science trend was extremely worrying. I don't get offended very easily, but that really did make my blood boil. It was like the article was trying to lump us in with anti-vaxxers and flat earthers or something like that, which we're not. Witches are very grounded in reality. We know that science works. We don't use witchcraft in replacement of science, we use it alongside. And we're not like those crazy essential oil mums, you know. At least not all of us are. I don't personally know any, and I know quite a few witches. I would even say that practicing witchcraft actually requires a very hard grasp on reality. You have to know exactly what you're doing, and witches themselves actually leave themselves very psychically vulnerable if they're not grounded and centered. The opposite is dissociated. If you're not grounded in the here and now, it's very difficult to perform any magic or contacting spirits or anything like that. Witchcraft is not anti-science, and we are not away with the fairies. That's the only phrase I can think of right now. Witches, I tend to find, are very logical folk. That's just my experience, and to date I have never come across an anti-vax witch or flat earth witch or anything like that. They're completely separate communities. They have nothing in common. Point number 4 is that you do not have to be naturally gifted. This misconception caused me a lot of grief in recent years. I was reading all these books and exposed to so many witches who just displayed these extraordinary gifts from childhood, right? They'd have precognitive dreams like daily, and they can see dead people or whatever, you know, those typical like psychic gifts that you expect all witches to have. Personally, I never showed any of these gifts, and I actually grew up in a household where I feel like my natural intuition was suppressed quite a lot. I was quite sheltered, so because of this I felt very disillusioned with witchcraft for a long time, because I'm not clairvoyant, I'm not clairaudient or anything like that. But psychic gifts are actually something you can develop and cultivate. Like, everyone has a little bit of psychic gifts within them, but it just takes a lot of practice, and I mean a lot, like many years of practice for some people. I'll admit, I myself am still in this process. It's probably going to take a lot of shadow work, a lot of practice in order to access those gifts, but I know that I am still a witch because I'm still able to cast spells and manifest what I want. And I see witchcraft as like more of a lens, right? Like you see the world in a different way and you see the beauty in it. Being a witch is more like a different way of looking at the world. At least it is for me. I'm not naturally gifted, but I can still call myself a witch. Misconception number 5. You do not have to practice every day. You are not any less of a witch if you don't practice every day, keep up with every moon phase, keep up with every Sabbath. Honestly, when witchcraft feels like a chore, it is time to take a step back and rekindle your passion for the craft. And if that means taking a break, then so be it. Sometimes we gotta take a break. Don't force yourself to do witchcraft if it feels like a chore. And maybe look for ways to connect to your craft in more subtle ways and self-care ways. Like I said, witchcraft is more of a mindset. If you're calling yourself a witch, you're opting in to seeing the world through a more magical perspective. Honestly, I don't believe that magic starts and stops when you cast a spell or make a circle or meditate. I think that magic is part of everything you do and part of everything that you think. You don't have to feel like keeping up with all these rituals that you want to do or offering things to deities all the time. If it's turning into a chore like that, then take a step back and reprioritize. Don't stress about having to get on every moon phase and celebrate all the Sabbats, because there are plenty of witches who just celebrate whatever Sabbat they feel like celebrating. You're not less of a witch for doing so, and there are plenty of witches who don't celebrate Sabbats at all, of course. Piece of advice number 6, there are websites that archive resources on witchcraft. A huge barrier for broke witches and closet witches is buying books, obviously, because we want to do all this research and books are really good, but maybe you can't afford them, or you can't justify buying a book when you don't even know how good it is. Maybe you just wouldn't be able to hide it because you're a closet witch and you don't want anyone finding all these books that you have. There are websites, like I said, that archive books and resources, and often you can access these for free. One of my favourite sites personally is thei.eu. I'll put that link in the description and on the video here. The point of this website was to archive as much knowledge as possible, and occult knowledge is no exception. It is my go-to when I want to learn something new about witchcraft and I want to pick up another book. Also, archiving sites have saved my witchy ass so many times. Sometimes I'm like deep into research, like reading web pages that haven't been updated since 2005, and I just find the link to that one thing that I really need, and then the website's been deleted, and so it's a dead end. But it's not, because when this happens, I use this website archive.org, also known as the Wayback Machine, and you can often find an archived version of the site. So I've actually used this to access a site on draconic witchcraft, for example. So it's really easy to use. When you think something is lost, just double check the Wayback Machine first. Tip number 7, you don't need lots of tools to be a witch. Unfortunately, I have noticed that capitalism has got its grubby hands onto witchcraft recently. My main advice here is don't fall into the consumerism and materialism that surrounds witchcraft nowadays. You don't actually need any tools to be a witch, just your mind and intentions are enough. So I personally recommend just getting the minimal amount of tools that you need or want, and definitely don't get disheartened by all the Instagram witches with all their hundreds of jars and bottles and herbs and crystals and candles. I know it seems like witches own like so much stuff, but you don't need any of it, really. Honestly, some of the best tools are borrowed from nature. You could find lots of objects to put on your altar on a walk outside in the woods or something like that, and a lot of witches craft their own wand out of a broken tree branch, just as an example. But if you really want something like a subscription box, I really suggest doing your research first. Try to get a box that is locally and ethically sourced. Sometimes the mainstream ones on like Etsy or something, sometimes they're not even made by witches, so yeah, definitely try and find a local one. Try and find one that has ethically sourced ingredients. The 8th thing that I wish I knew, you don't need white sage or Palo Santo. I'm not sure how to pronounce that one. These herbs are often cited as very powerful cleansing herbs. White sage is often called a spiritual bleach. You're often given the impression that everyone needs at least white sage, but both of these herbs are actually endangered species due to overcultivation. There can also be quite a bit of cultural appropriation with white sage in particular. It is a sacred herb to Native Americans. They have a very specific way to cultivate their herbs using all 4 elements and a great deal of respect. If you're buying your sage from primarily Caucasian sellers, then there is a good chance it hasn't been cultivated ethically. In this case, it's best to grow your own, or better yet, use alternatives like just garden sage, or rosemary is actually just as good. For closet witches, don't worry, I made a video on alternative cleansing methods that do not require you to spend money or use smudge sticks. You can find that in an iCard or in the description. The last thing, number 9, that I wish I knew when I first started is that a lot of crystals and tools aren't ethically sourced. This is kind of similar to the last point, but it deserves a point of its own as well. In general, if your crystals are dirt cheap, then they're probably not ethically sourced. A lot of crystals are mined by children and workers with very few rights, not to mention the effect that mining has on the environment. You should be buying from sellers who can ideally trace back their crystals all the way back to the source. Another thing about crystals is that a lot of them are fake. For instance, turquoise and citron are often the most fake. Turquoise is actually extremely rare and very expensive as a result. If you're picking it up for a few quid, then it's probably just dyed howlite, almost certainly. If you're paying a lot for it, then make sure it comes with a certificate proving its authenticity. For citron, it's often faked by just heating up amethyst to high temperatures. You can usually tell if citron is fake if it has dark tips, not uniform coloration, and is sold cheaply. Genuine citron doesn't have the rich orange colour that you're normally drawn to. Instead, it has a more pale shade, more like white wine. If you're looking to buy ethically sourced crystals, just type that exact search term into Google and you should find some websites that claim to sell ethically sourced crystals. And also, why not mine them yourself? You can actually search for gem hunting or fee mining sites near you. I know there's quite a lot in the USA. Crystals aren't the only thing that can be unethically sourced. Things like tarot cards can be affected too for slightly different reasons. If you're buying a tarot deck for a cheap price, it's almost certainly counterfeit. The quality of cards will not be as good, and there might even be some cards missing if you're very unlucky. But of course, this is stolen artwork and stolen revenue from the original artists. So yeah, just take that into account. If you're looking to buy a cheap tarot deck, like I know tarot decks aren't the cheapest thing ever, just have that in mind if you do want to buy a cheap tarot deck. But yeah, there you go guys, those were 9 things I wish I knew when I first started witchcraft. If this video was helpful or you learned something new, please give it a thumbs up and share it with other people. That's all I have for now. Please stay safe. I hope you have a great day, and blessed be.